Okay, the reading for this week is the next part in our series on pre-modern, medieval, early modern Japanese civilization, culture, religion, philosophy, and so forth. And today we'll be reading excerpts from Shinran's Lamentation and Self-Reflection. And because this excerpt is so short, I'm going to actually read an additional essay about Shinran by the great Maiyoshu scholar in classical Japanese literature scholar Nakanishi Susumu, whose book I recently translated here. The book is called The Japanese Linguistic Landscape, Reflections on Quintessential Words. And Nakanishi Susumu is, I think, 91 or in his late 80s or early 90s right now. And he's one of the great living scholars of classical Japanese literature. And he wrote a 4 or 5 page short little essay on Shinran that is included at the end of my translation in this book. So I'll read this excerpt that is on your worksheet first, and then I will follow by reading my translation of Nakanishi Sensei's short essay on Shinran. Okay, so we can delve more deeply into Shinran than would be possible just reading this short little excerpt. All right. Let's start with the excerpt, though. And this is taken, once again, from Sources of Japanese Tradition, Volume 1, published 2001. I'll put the information to that book in the description below, so you can order it and read along. And Shinran was born in 1173, died in 1263. So he lived at the end of the Heian period and during the first part of the Kamakura period. If you haven't memorized the dates of these major Japanese periods, do so immediately. I'll put the dates below in the description so you can memorize them. So Shinran was a disciple of Honen, who we've already encountered. He was one of the great Buddhist priests of the Heian period. So Shinran was a disciple of Honen, who was the founder of the Jodo sect in Japan, the Jodo or the Pure Land sect in Japan. And Shinran broke free from his teacher and established the Jodo Shinshu. Okay, so Honen, his teacher, founded the Jodo or Pure Land sect. Shinran, who's his student, founded the Jodo Shinshu, or the true teaching of the Pure Land. Honen and Shinran were both exiled in 1207 by the government, which objected to the practice of chanting the Nembutsu. And the Nembutsu, you'll remember, means I put my faith in Amida Buddha. Practitioners believed that by chanting the Nembutsu, they would attain salvation. And the government, the authorities didn't like this, so they exiled both of these Buddhist priests, Shinran and his teacher Honen. Shortly after this, Shinran abandoned the Nembutsu practice, which he then considered self-centered and opposed to the teaching of salvation by other power. Okay, so Honen believed that you could attain salvation, attain enlightenment just by reciting the Nembutsu over and over again and focusing on your own faith in your own self, right? But Shinran came to reject this and said that salvation must come through Tariki, through another power, rather than Jiriki. So remember, Tariki and Jiriki are two important terms that we'll go over in class. Tariki is power from another. Hoka is the kanji for that. Hoka no chikara, right? Tariki. And the other is Jiriki, focusing on attaining salvation, attaining enlightenment through one's own powers. Shinran married and had children, thus also departing from the clerical life. Okay, so usually Buddhist priests would take a vow of celibacy and not get married, but Shinran rejected this and he ended up getting married and having children and departing from the clerical life. His most significant treatise is the Kyōgyo Shinsho, the teaching, practice, faith, and realization. And Nakanishi Sensei refers to that essay in this his essay as well, which I'll read after reading the excerpt from this. All right, so this is an excerpt or several excerpts from Shinran's Lamentation and Self-Reflection. And the Lamentation, the original is, I forget the title of the original Japanese, we'll go over that later. All right, here are the excerpts from Shinran's Lamentation and Self-Reflection. Although I have entered the Buddha land path, I remain incapable of true and genuine thoughts and feelings. My very existence is pervaded by vanity and falsehood. There is nothing at all of any purity of mind. Being unrepentant and lacking in shame, I have no mind of truth and sincerity. And yet, because the name has been given by Amida Buddha, the universe is suffused with its virtues. Deeply saddening is it that in these times both the monks and laity in Japan, while seeking to conform with Buddhist manner and deportment, worship gods and spirits of the heavens and earth. Okay, so this is translated by Dennis Hirota, and it's included in his Shōzo Matsu Wasang. And alright, and there are 3 study questions. Number 1, what is Shinran's view of his own capacity for spiritual realization? So judging from the short excerpt, answer that question. In light of question number 2, what does he mean in referring to the name? And question 3, what is his view of spirituality in Japan? Alright, so in class we'll go over Shinran and Honen and Jodo, and the differences between Jodo or Pure Land sect and Jodo Shinshu, the true teaching of the Pure Land. And now I will read this essay by Nakanishi sensei about Shinran. Right. The words of Shinran, Shinran no kotoba. This is again my translation included in this book, which you want to order. I'll provide the link to the book so you can purchase it and read it on your own. Shinran and the Contemporary World. More than 7.5 centuries have passed since the great Japanese Buddhist monk Shinran, 1173 to 1263, died. And yet, not once during that long span has Shinran's name been forgotten. His teachings are more necessary now than ever before, in fact. Generations of Japanese called Shinran Shinran-san, out of a special sense of intimate respect. I always attribute his enduring popularity to the fact that virtually everyone has something to say about him. Forgive me for using the phrase Shinran popularity, but it is appropriate given the man's tremendous popular appeal and charisma. This feeling of familiarity has continuously kindled affection for this great religious figure. I too am among those who feel close to Shinran and have something to say about him. I've even included a short essay on Shinran's life and teachings in my compiled writings, and I revisit his works every now and then. When I glance through the books in my bookshelves, I come across many works related to Shinran. Among them is the work by the novelist and essayist Itsuki Hiroyuki, who's a contemporary novelist who wrote a work called Tariki, Embracing Despair, Discovering Peace, 2001. One could argue that Shinran's revolutionary doctrine known as Akunin Shoki. So underline this Akunin Shoki. This is one of the doctrines, or the doctrine that Shinran is best known for. Akunin Shoki, so bad people Shoki, Akunin Warubito Shoki, has been central in sustaining his popular appeal over the centuries. Akunin Shoki is Shinran's famous notion that the primary object of Amida Buddha's powers of salvation, by which humans achieve rebirth in paradise, is not the virtuous. The primary object is not the virtuous, but rather the akunin, the sinners and the evil ones. As he puts it in his Tanninsho, so this is the original title of his notes lamenting the differences. Tanninsho is one of his famous works. As he puts it in the Tanninsho, if a good man, or zennin, can be reborn in paradise, a bad one, akunin, can be all the more so. Zennin nao mote ojo o togu iwan ya akunin o ya is the original there. What a radical statement to make. No doubt careful consideration went into making such a weighty, controversial pronouncement, one that reveals his unprejudiced eye and boundless capabilities. When I wonder just how many human hearts his words and teachings must have saved over the course of history, I start to feel dizzy. It's staggering to me. Indeed, I'd say the number must be in the hundreds of millions, maybe even billions. In my view, the various recondite theories about Shinran's life are of little practical value. Few people have willingly relinquished as many personal possessions as Shinran did. So Shinran is famous for giving up all of his belongings. He gave away all of his belongings, even the clothes on his back, virtually renouncing even the last remains of food in his stomach. Certainly, the conviction to discard one's every last belonging is a hard conviction to keep. When people would ask him how they should conduct themselves during their short times on this earth, his response was always the same: recite the sutra. By sutra, of course, he meant the Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu, or I take refuge in Amida Buddha. That's the phrase central to the Pure Land school of Buddhism in Japan. It goes without saying that his teaching transcends time. Yet it is also equally obvious that both people and the world have lost their original vitality to an unprecedented degree over the last few decades. Such spiritual impoverishment has few equals in history. What we humans must now do is jettison our attachment to superfluous things, search out more authentic modes of experience, and aim to live a fuller, richer life that meets our essential needs rather than simply going on with the conventional way of living. This does not mean, however, that we should strive to live or act in a forced, unnatural manner. We simply must combine our own natural energies with those of everyone else in order to find a way to go on living together in harmony. The great calligrapher Hibi no Goho, who lived 1901 to 1985, in his final work left these words before departing from this world: "There is a supreme joy to be felt when we blossom together in unison." This notion of blossoming together in collective unison is precisely the meaning of tariki. So this is the word that I mentioned above, very important in the context of Buddhism, tariki versus jiriki. Tariki is the method of salvation through the power of an other, through the power of somebody else, whereas jiriki is the method of salvation through one's own powers. When everyone blossoms together in collective fellowship, it is wise to follow Shinran's lessons. And of course, Shinran emphasized tariki over jiriki. Plainly stated, you should simply relax and release the tension in your shoulder. This method of tariki, relying on the other powers for salvation, does not mean, of course, that we should simply let ourselves fall into laziness or sloth or wait passively for rapture. On the contrary, blossoming in unison requires even more effort than does the path of jiriki, or reliance on one's own strength, which seeks to attain salvation alone. And then the next section of this essay, the Tanninsho, or the notes lamenting the differences, and the Kyōgyō Shinsho, which is referenced in that excerpt on your worksheet. The true teaching, practicing, and realization of the Pure Land Way. The most important literary work in Shinran's corpus is no doubt his magnum opus Kyōgyō Shinsho, the true teaching, practice, and realization of the Pure Land Way, which was completed around the year 1224. But I strongly advise that people should also read and savor his extremely concise treatise Tanninsho, Notes Lamenting the Differences, which comprises a series of interview notes transcribed by the famous monk Yui En, just before Yui En's death. This work cemented the legacy of Shinran for later generations. And there's a note about Yui En, who was a Buddhist monk who lived from 1222 to 1289. It's relatively easy to read, the Tanninsho. Having set his heart to the task of educating and enlightening the masses, Shinran came to dislike the fastidious self-reliance doctrine of jiriki. Okay, so that's a good way to translate jiriki, is self-reliance, which holds that it is possible to attain salvation through one's own strength. With that in mind, it's time to examine Shinran's renowned Kyōgyō Shinsho. The work's title consists of 4 characters: Kyo, which is to teach; Gyo, which is to do or to act; Shin, which is to believe or to have faith in, and Sho, which is to attest or to corroborate or to prove, suggesting what are probably the four essential components of all religions: teaching, action, belief, and testament. The thrust of the book, needless to say, is the subject of belief, Shin. In particular, Shinran's teachings urge people to rely not on their own strength, but rather on the strength of Amida Nyorai, or Mida, as Shinran sometimes called this celestial Buddha. Amida Nyorai, who is the most important in Jodo Shinshu and Jodo, Pure Land Buddhism. He went even further, insisting that people's faith in the saving power of Amida, or Mida as he called him, should occupy an unconscious realm, so deep down that they aren't even aware of their own dependence. You can see just... Scroll up here. You can see just how important belief was for him. For example, here's a passage from the Kyōgyo Shinsho. Okay, here's an excerpt, an extended passage from the Kyōgyo Shinsho. The master spoke. Trust, Shin, constitutes the foundation of the way. Where there is trust, there can be no heart that is defiled with earthly dust. Trust allows us to bestow charity upon the needy, begrudging nothing. Those with trust joyfully enter into the Buddhist law, the Dharma, the whole, Buppo. Trust fosters and increases wisdom, meritorious deeds, and virtue. Those with trust will always eventually reach the realm of the Nyorai, the realm of enlightened ones. Trust effectively purifies all sensory perception. When the power of trust is fortified and hardened, people will experience none of the three sufferings, the Sanku, three sufferings. Trust thoroughly and everlastingly annihilates worldly desires, Bonno, at the root. Faith properly and single-mindedly seeks out the blessing, the Kudoku, of the Buddha. End passage quote. I wish I had enough page space to elaborate further. For the purposes of my discussion here, though, note that he manages to repeat the word trust, Shin, a total of 9 times in the short passage. By trust, of course, he means trust in the primal vow, the Hongang, which is the only means by which one can attain supreme enlightenment. Why exactly did Shinran preach the importance of faith, Shin, so powerfully? Another passage from the On Faith chapter states the following, quote, "What a pathetic creature I am. I, Gutokurang," that's the nickname he gave himself, "I, Gutokurang, taking my name from that foolish, bald, mythical bird known as the Rang, drowning in the vast ocean of sexual desire, seduced by the great mountain of fame and repute, Meiji, finding no joy despite having entered the ranks of enlightened ones, incapable of enjoying my approach to the Jodo or Pure Land. How shameful, how piteous." End quote. Obviously, the subjects of this passage, amorous desire, or Ioka, and worldly repute, or Meiji, are natural concerns for all humans. But those corrupted, morally compromised people among us, those who get tangled up in the concerns of the mundane, have no capacity for self-enlightenment. No matter how hard they might try, they cannot avoid getting caught up in the ordinary path. And so avoiding that ever-tempting road is not something they can do on their own strength alone, on their jiriki alone. Helpless and devoid of strength, as he put it, they have only one recourse: to put their faith in the merciful hands of Amida Nyorai. Okay, so Tariki, putting their faith in another, namely the merciful hands of Amida Nyorai. And yet, some will say, Shinran may have espoused such teachings, but didn't he contradict himself when he decided to marry a woman? Didn't he live a longer life than most people of his era did? Isn't he just a hypocrite? You might raise those objections, but Shinran would not have seen your objections as evidence of contradiction. In fact, Shinran discusses this very issue in the chapter on faith. Humans cannot avoid illness and death. Those who are fortunate enough to have a skilled doctor and access to good medicine can have their illnesses treated and be healed. In Shinran's lexicon, these benefits can also be achieved through what he calls monji, which literally means the sutra listening cures. Monji, mon is kiku, and ji is to cure, nausa, which literally means sutra listening cures. The Buddhist term monji means to cure one's afflictions by listening and heeding Buddhist law. That is, to develop a devout heart simply by listening repeatedly to the 6-character chant of the Namu Amida Butsu of Amida Nyorai. Shinran did not positively affirm lust, Ioka, and worldly fame, Meiji. He just asserted the vital importance of knowing that faith always proceeds from a state of sadness and hardship, which arise out of our insatiable spirit-drowning desire for love and fame, Ioka and Meiji. It is only natural that religion should seek to elucidate the nature of belief and faith. But the singular uniqueness of Shinran's thought is that he places his own sadness, the sadness of Gutoka, of being the bald fool, as he called himself, at the opposite side of faith. And the final section of this essay is Shinran in the minds of the Japanese. To me, this way of thinking about salvation and suffering is even more essential in the disenchanted, spiritually impoverished age in which we now live. Today in Japan, the sadness around us represents a crucible for forging a new kind of faith, Shin. Precisely what Shinran instructed humanity to do. It once occurred to me that the masses of Japanese people must have breathed a tremendous collective sigh of relief when the Jodo Shinshu school, true pure land of Buddhism, first appeared in Japan in the 13th century. Okay, with Shinran being the founder of this school, the Jodo Shinshu school. And one more page. After being transported to Japan in the mid-6th century by Song of Baekje in Korea, the Korean peninsula, who reigned 523 to 554. So after being transported to Japan by this king or emperor of Korea, Buddhism had come to be an ideological weapon of the state used to stabilize the new royal authority and pacify the country. So this is Kegon or Huayang Buddhism that first came to Japan in the 6th century. Buddhism, and it was used as an ideological weapon of the state, used to stabilize the new royal authority and pacify the country. This tradition persisted for several centuries as a kind of fortuitous arrangement between the imperial court and the Buddhist authorities. But for the general masses, that convoluted relationship made the doctrine hard to readily comprehend. Ideological state Buddhism lacked the proper utility in providing salvation to the anguished hearts of the people. So he's referring to the first phase of Buddhism, stage of Buddhism in Japan during the Nara period, which was more or less state Buddhism and had not really spread. It was confined to the elite aristocracy and the government officials and so forth, and hadn't reached the hearts of the people. At that point, Honen, so Shinran's teacher Honen, and Shinran came down from the mountain to expound a new teaching to the masses, to the people. I imagine the common folk were overjoyed, greatly grateful to learn the joyous blessings and virtues of the Buddha. After encountering brutal government suppression, Honen and Shinran both eventually had to flee the capital. So their kind of populism made them unpopular with the elites, with the officials. Shinran went on to tread the arduous, lonely path of the revolutionary pioneer. But the development of culture is a curious thing. It can only take root after passing through multiple configurations and permutations. No cultural phenomenon can last unless it undergoes these necessary stages of transformation. After all, culture is something that solidifies its roots through frequent social transitions, which continuously both reinforce and modify it. This is the nature of all forms of culture, religion included. After his death, Shinran's philosophy continued to spread through successive generations of Japanese people in a continuous unbroken line. Though the majority of Japanese people today claim to have no religion, they often unwittingly find themselves intoning to themselves the Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu. I take refuge in Amida Buddha, they say. In our current times, which are fraught with great peril and drastic upheavals, we should once again embrace the teachings of Shinran and endeavor to seek out new modes of living. And the only way to find those new restorative modes of living is through the crucible of pain and suffering. All right, that's the end of Professor Nakanishi's kind of meandering, almost Zichte-style essay. So it's not an essay in the sort of academic sense that has a thesis and argues using evidence to support that thesis in a logical, coherent way, but rather it's a kind of in the style of the Japanese, the traditional Zichte. All right, we'll discuss the Zichte more in class. That is all for now, and we'll talk about Shinran and Jodo Shu and Jodo Shinshu in class later. I will see you then. Goodbye.